by the name of Henry Ford, who really, I think, probably had the biggest impact on the automotive industry. Because way back in 1908, in Dearborn, Michigan, just outside of Detroit, it was one Henry Ford who had a lot of Henry Ford's vision on what he wanted to see in the automotive industry has come to fruition. We're going to talk about some of those, but Time Magazine recently, within the past 2 or 3 years, named Henry Ford as one of the top 100 innovators of all time, and there's no doubt that he was. One of his, let's talk about another industry leader, and that's General Motors. And I said 1908, Henry Ford. It was also 1908 that General Motors came together, September 16, 1908, up in Flint, Michigan, just north of Detroit, also in the Detroit area, of course, came together as a conglomeration of otherwise smaller automotive manufacturers, including Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Cadillac, Chevrolet, but Chevrolet came later, about in 1918, joined General Motors. But let's go back to Henry Ford. It was 105 years ago that the Model T first rolled off the assembly line. The assembly line process was Henry Ford's vision, and he really developed it out, spent a lot of time envisioning and developing the assembly line process. And of course, at that time, in 1913, when the Model T rolled off the assembly line, the only thing that was produced in an assembly line process in the world at that time were guns. And guns had been for about 50 years. But now, not only are Fords and General Motors and other U.S. manufacturers produce their cars on the assembly line process, of course, all auto manufacturers do now. It's the typical way and only way of doing business. Then there's the dealership. And by the way, the other thing that Henry Ford envisioned was an independent franchise dealer network. Because Henry Ford was a very smart individual. You could call him, I think, maybe this is fair, maybe it isn't, the Elon Musk of his day. He envisioned he was an innovator, and he envisioned the assembly line process. He also envisioned having the cars sold at the end of the assembly line process. He didn't want to have to, he knew he didn't have the bandwidth enough to establish 5,000 different distribution points in every community across the U.S. He franchised dealers to sell those products all over the U.S. with the idea that they would buy them when they ended up at the end of his assembly line process. So, and one of those dealers right here in Colorado is Flower Motor Company out in Montrose, Colorado, and is the incoming chair of the Colorado Auto Dealer Association. That was one of those Ford dealers back in 1908. And Flower Motor Company sold Fords until 1913, had a difference with Ford Motor Company, picked up Dodge. Dodge Brothers started out in 1914 actually. And so I guess it was 1914 Flowers picked up Dodge. And is still a Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Ram dealer in Montrose, Colorado, and has Subaru as an additional brand. Everybody knows the $1 Million Highway between Duray and Durango. It was a Chrysler out of Flower Motor Company that was the first motor vehicle over the $1 Million Highway. It was Fletcher Flower's granddad's car. So Henry Ford realized that he had his hands full in designing the cars, acquiring the parts, tools, and equipment it took to build the cars, building out this assembly line process, hiring the people it took to build the cars. And he wanted that. The other thing he envisioned was he wanted his factory people, factory workers, to be able to afford to buy the cars. So he wanted to pay them a wage affordable enough to, strong enough so they could buy their own. And so those were all things that Henry Ford envisioned. Well, that dealership network grew. And it started out really in 1908 at nothing because there weren't anybody franchising dealers until then. But all the way up to 1960 to 50,000 dealers and dealerships. And oh, by the way, back in the day, and many of you, and I'm looking at, you've been around the industry as a consumer of the industry, if not right in the industry, you can remember there used to be a dealership with every wide spot in the road. So, and when we hit 50,000 dealerships in the late 50s and early 60s, there were dealerships in places in Colorado like Brush, Colorado, which today has none, then had 3. In places like Sterling, Colorado today has 2 dealers. In 1960, had 13.
Wow.
Or in places like Palmer Lake, Colorado. And George and I were up doing a Rotary, one of those mini Rotary Club presentations in Meade, Colorado, and we drove through the town. One of the pictures you'll see here in a minute, they say, hey, that's the old Chevrolet store in Meade. Turned out it wasn't, but it looked a lot like it. But the difference between then and now, the difference between 13 dealerships in Sterling, Colorado in 1960 and 2 in 2015 is this: the factory requirements of the dealerships and capitalization in buildings and facilities. And by the way, today, every time you drive down I-25, or let's say like you drive down Broadway or Arapahoe Road or 104th or Havana or West Colfax, and you see the brand dealership sign or the brand sign in front of the dealership, each of those represents on average an investment factor of something between, on average, $12 and $16 million for that facility. And that includes the building, of course, the grounds, the real estate, the plant operation tools and equipment, the parts, tools, and equipment, all the inventory. And that's just the average. Some of them can go all the way up to 30, 40, or even $50 million on each store. So that's why it's no longer economically feasible to have 3 dealerships in Brush, Colorado, or 13 in Sterling. And by the way, back when there were 13 dealerships in Sterling, Colorado, those 13 different stores served 22 different brands. Almost all of those brands were domestic, but the international nameplates started moving into the U.S. in the 50s and 60s. All the dealership owners lived in Sterling. They got up every morning and went to work in Sterling. They had one store, usually one brand, and they hired people and did their business in Sterling and went home at night. Today, those 2 dealerships that are in Sterling, neither are owned by dealers that live in Sterling. So it's a big difference. So we've got all the way up to 50,000 and back down. That number says 2013, but the number today is still about the same, and it's about 17,000 dealerships. So we've tripled down. And if that number sounds pretty amazing, think about this. In the course of those 65 years, between 1960 and 2015, the U.S. population has more than doubled. So even as the population is more than doubled, the number of dealerships have decreased by triple. So these are what the dealerships looked like then. Let's say 1950s, 1960s. This is one that was they identified as Meade, an old Volkswagen store, Belmont Chevy Olds, and I don't know what that other one is, compared to these. And that's the difference in the capitalization requirements. The factories will put demands on the dealer so that the idea is that if you're driving down any street USA, in whether it's Broadway or Colfax or Havana or 104th or Arapahoe, and you see the big blue box, you recognize it as a Chevrolet store, the white front with the red logo, the Toyota store, and so on. The insides of these facilities are nothing short of amazing. You got a question? Go ahead.
Tim, just a quick question. Do you have any idea how much of the reduction in dealerships was due to consolidation of brands versus capital requirement?
I don't think, there's probably some, but not a lot, and here's why. Let's say GM eliminated brands when they went through the bankruptcy in 2009. They eliminated Hummer, Saturn, Oldsmobile. They'd already eliminated Oldsmobile, Pontiac, and Saab, thank you. And but most of those dealers that had those brands had them in stores. So those dealers went on and forward with other brands in their stores. So that not too many, although there has been some of that. But keep in mind, there's also been other brands that have entered the markets in that time. Like in the 1960s, Hyundai and Kia were not in the U.S. market, but they are today, and some other brands. So not a lot of other brands, but some. But the insides of these stores and the facility requirements are nothing short of amazing. When you go in to have your car serviced at any modern dealership today, you're going to have Wi-Fi in the showroom or in the waiting area for the service department. You're going to have the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Denver Post, the Denver Business Journal, and all kinds of different publications at your ease. You're going to have a coffee maker, a snack machine. Most of these are going to be free. I guess probably always what you see is free. This happens to be a BMW store out on C470 in Lucent that opened in 2008, but it's not uncommon in any dealership that you'll see in the marketplace today. Here's a snapshot. Let's shift from the facilities to sales. Here's a snapshot of the U.S. sales trends. And you see the high water mark on U.S. sales was in the year 2000. This is national. Was in the year 2000, and that high water mark was 17.4 million. We declined a little. It wasn't a straight line down like on the chart, but we declined a little bit year in and year out. And that matched Colorado's trend as well. And then it really went off the cliff, of course, in 08 and 09 during the recession. And it dropped all the way down to just 9 million and change, between 9 and 10 million. That's the bad news. The good news is how fast it's bounced back. This is a chart specific to Colorado, and it's updated just last week. The Colorado's high water mark was also the year 2000. We went down a little bit year in and year out, up a little bit in 05. That happened to be the year that the factories did the employee pricing for all, if you remember that. It wasn't a big uptick, but it was a little uptick. Then we got to 2007, 175, dropped down all the way from 175 to 104 in 2009. And look at that 2009 number compared to the 2000 number. It was a drop of 49.7%, like 0.3% of being a double down. That's the bad news, and I'm really not here to talk to you about bad news. I'd rather talk to you about the good news on the other side of that recession. We were back up in 2010, just a moderate 6.7%, up a little more in 2011, about 11.9%. In 2012, 21.9%. These are Colorado-specific numbers. In 2013, about 13.3%. 2014, it leveled off a little bit, about the 6% that Brian talked about in the intro. And we just put out a news release, dropped a news release at 10 o'clock this morning. Some of you heard it on KOA today or on the radio. And we're up today, through the end of November, 10.2%. But here's some amazing numbers. I think you'll agree. Between January 1 of 2010, the first year back up, between January 1, 2010, and December 31 of 2014, that's last December, most recent completed year. We can't count 2015 until we complete it this month. In that 5-year time period, in the state of Colorado, new car sales were up, and this is based on registration count, a whopping 80.2%. And this year's number is another 10.2% on top of that. You know, we don't know what December's number will be. They raised interest rates today, by the way, 0.25%. I was interviewed today by the Associated Press and by Reuters, and helped a Reuters photographer find a dealership that takes pictures just in case they raise the interest rate. You know, I don't think it's going to be disastrous that they raised. Do you think it's going to be disastrous? The stock market went up today. The most important economic indicator for our industry is not the interest rates or the fuel prices, although those are important, or access to credit, and that's really important. The most important economic indicator for our industry is consumer confidence. Consumer confidence that they're going to have the job at the end of the month, that they're going to be able to make that car payment or that lease payment. This is really amazing statistics. The other amazing thing, and this is the untold story. The untold story about the auto industry is how much improvement we've seen over the past few years in the overall quality of the new car products. And when I talk about quality, we're talking about overall durability, longevity, life expectancy, reliability, overall quality. And that has improved across brands, across makes and models. And sometimes I'll have people call me and say, "Hey Tim, I'm in the market for a new car. What should I stay away from?" And I said, "Stay away from." Well, yeah, what car do I want to stay away from so I don't have trouble? There's not a bad car. Yeah, maybe. Well, every product is in a national recall. Every product is in a national recall.